Hey everyone, welcome back. We're continuing our reading of this wonderful book. It is The Sword of Allah. Alright, let's begin. We are in a new section. This is titled The Siege of Taif. The Prophet had routed the enemy at Hunain and driven him from Autas. He now decided to give Malik bin Auf no time to recover his breath and organize further resistance. So the enemy at Hunain has been effectively pushed back. Now Malik needs to be finished off. Consequently, he sent the captives and the flocks taken at Autas with an escort to Jirana, to be kept under guard until the return of the army. I mean, some people might assume, why would you want to guard those flocks? I mean, that's literally your meat right there. And the very next day he set out for Taif, where major resistance was to be encountered. But he moved cautiously, for after the unpleasant experience of the ambush at Hunain, he had no intention of letting the army walk into another trap. The country now was hilly, consisting of steep ridges rising up to the plateau on which stood Taif. Wow, so they have to climb up then. So ridges just rising up, and then there's that plateau, and then boom, there's Taif. In this terrain, a wily commander like Malik could lay an ambush almost anywhere. Oh, okay, because all the parts are blocked. Okay. Leaving your line of perception, get it? Leaving Autas, the Prophet marched through the Nakhla Valley and then turned south into the Wadi ul Mulay. So the Nakhla Valley and Wadi ul Mulay. That's spelled Muleih. From this valley he crossed into Wadi ul Qarn, and following this Wadi, reached the plateau 7 miles northwest of Taif. So far, the Muslims had encountered no opposition, and scouts had reported no sign of the Saqif outside Taif. Okay, so the Saqif, they're not around the terrain, not around the plateau, and the coast is clear so far. But hoping to surprise Malik, the Prophet shifted his axis. Cutting across the difficult terrain north of Taif, he got to the less hilly region lying of the east town, between Nikib and Sadira. Wow, so look at all these different geographical locations. Wadi ul Qarn, Wadi ul Malay, Nakhla Valley, and Taif, and now Nikib and Sadira. Wow. And of course, awesome, he has a map right here, because I was just thinking, like, okay, I want to see what it looks like. Here he marched to Taif, coming in from the rear. Throughout this march, Khalid again led the army with the Bani Sulaim as advanced guard. So Khalid put the Bani Sulaim as the advanced guard. But Malik bin Auf, in spite of his lack of years, was not a man to be caught unawares. Having suffered grievously in his clash with the Muslims at Hunain and Autas, he was determined not to accept battle with the Muslims again in the open field. I mean, at that point, it's like might makes right, or good strategizing, but it appears that there's a bit of trapping going on, so he wants to do the other way, and you can't really trap as well in the open, although you can ambush, right? He would fight them on his own terms. Consequently, he kept his army within the walled city of Taif and speedily stocked it with sufficient provisions to withstand a long siege. Again, even back then, these military leaders, right, they're very aware of provision supplies and how those supplies have to be maintained. You often wonder, our leaders today, they're looking at an overfilling instead of a supply chain malfunction. You often can tell the intelligence of a leader by how much different angles they can weigh within their mind and prepare for, right? Clearly, Malik, Khalid, and the Prophet, and everyone involved is thinking in so many dynamic ways how they're going to win these battles. Here the Saqif, under their brave young general, awaited the arrival of the Muslims. Okay, so they're waiting. The Muslims got to Taif on February 5th, 6:30, the 15th of Shawwal, 8 al-Hijri. and started a siege which was to last 18 days. That's not bad. On arrival at Taif, the camp was set up too close to the wall of the town, and this mistake was punished by the Sakif archers, who showered the camp with arrows. Ooh! Oh my gosh. So, too close to their archers' range. Oh man. So they're like, hey, we're in here in Taif, let's set up camp. Whew. And the Sakif archers were like, baited, we got them. A few Muslims were killed before the camp was moved away and established in the area where the Mosque of Ibn Abbas stands today. Oh, so they camped next to this, close to this place in the mosque. Mosque of Ibn Abbas. I wonder if there's pictures of that on Google or on Pinterest. Check it out. But what surprises me about this is that, okay, they see that, okay, if it's in range and the Sakif fired on them, but they just fired the arrows. They didn't send like a small guard to be like, let's engage them a little bit, right? Instead, they're like, no, just shoot some arrows, get them out of the way. We'll deal with like a bigger battle later, right? Groups of Muslims were now deployed around the fort to prevent entry and escape. Okay, so they're around the fort to prevent escape. So that if they go out, no, there's no going out for the opponent. And if the opponent wants to get in, there's going to be a fight for it. And Abu Bakr was made responsible for the siege operations. Most of the time, fighting between the two armies consisted of exchanges of archery. The Muslims would close up to the town and try to pick off the Sakif archers on the wall. Wow, that's hard. But the Sakif had the odds in their favor, as they had some cover while the Muslims were in the open. Yeah, so archers on the wall, so they probably have like the space, a pivot, space, a pivot. Like, I wondered their walls, or how do they construct these walls? What would the Sakif archer walls look like? Because that tells you a lot about the different angles they can fire from. But the Muslims being in open ground, it's like shooting trout in a barrel, you know? So the Muslims got the worst of these engagements, and many of them were wounded, including Abdullah, son of Abu Bakr. Abdullah, son of Abu Bakr, who later died of his wounds. Oof. And not a lot of antibiotics. Thus, some days passed after the fall of Mecca. The Prophet had sent 2 Muslims to Jurash. Okay, we got a group going to. Is it a group? The Prophet sent 2 Muslims. Hold on, cohorts or just 2 people in the Yemen to learn all about siege warfare. These 2 men. Okay, so it was just, yeah, it was 2 men. However, returned till after the siege of Taif, and thus could play no part in the siege. Oh no! So by the time they got their training, they didn't really get to use it at that opportune moment. Siege of Taif. But Salman, the Persian, again came to the help of the Muslims, as he had done in the Battle of the Ditch. As a Persian, he knew something about more sophisticated forms of warfare. Under his instructions, the Muslims constructed a catapult and used it to hurl stones into the town. Oh, catapults, yeah, trebuchet and catapults. But the Muslims were amateurs at this business, and the catapult produced no significant effect. Because you have to aim it towards the tower. You have to aim it towards the tower or towards the gate. Right? Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. That's one benefit of video games, man. Because in those video games, you can get some interesting examples. So now look, this is the map 6, Hunain and Taif. I hope you can see it pretty well. I'll hold it still for you. Looks like that. Well, very cool, man. So, Atwab would not. Oh, okay, yeah. Definitely shows you everything. It's freaking cool, man. You had to know the terrain back then. You had to know it.